Welcome to the Grind with Art Grindstone. I'm Art Grindstone. Years in the field taught me the world rarely offers easy answers. And tonight, we're digging into a planet that feels like it's been set to hair trigger. From the smoke-filled bunker to your headphones, we hunt the stories others won't touch. Cold War ghosts rubbing shoulders with drone swarms, secret raids that never made the evening bulletin, and naval armadas parked off the coasts of countries that used to be off limits. If you like your curiosity with an edge, hit subscribe and stick around. Tonight we open with a single, blunt truth. The world is straining under the weight of military posturing and hybrid warfare, and the line separating rehearsal from real conflict is getting thin. Start with Zapad 2025. Russia and Belarus joint military exercises that ran around mid-September this year. Official Kremlin statements put the maneuvers at about 100,000 personnel across 41 training grounds from Western Russia to Belarus, with long-range bombers, naval units, and even tactical nuclear scenarios practiced in simulated playbooks. Independent analysts and regional intelligence offered a narrower estimate, tens of thousands rather than 100,000, and pointed out the exercise emphasized command and control of forces, missile strikes, and rehearsal of systems like the new Oreshnik intermediate-range missile. Either way, these were not your backyard drills. They were a signal. Why the worry? Because Europe remembers the pattern. Zapad-style exercises have historically been followed by real operations, and NATO countries on the eastern flank watched jets scramble, borders tighten, and airspace restrictions cascade within days of the maneuvers. Poland closed crossings with Belarus and restricted air corridors as a precaution, while Baltic states reported multiple airspace probes in 2025, part of a larger posture shift that has NATO beefing up surveillance and readiness ahead of winter. Supporters of the exercises insist they're defensive, meant to test interoperability and readiness. Critics say staging nuclear-capable rehearsals near NATO borders is provocatory by design. Meanwhile, the eastward tremor jumped into NATO airspace. In early September, drones penetrated Polish skies during a barrage of strikes across the border. NATO jets and Allied fighters scrambled, and Polish forces recovered debris from roughly a dozen to nearly 20 unmanned vehicles, depending on which brief you read. The UN Security Council convened quickly to discuss the breach, and Kiev accused Moscow of deliberately sending probes to test NATO's resolve. Moscow denied targeting Poland, blaming cross-border chaos in active combat zones. The result? Airspace denials, heightened interceptions, and a new precedent. The first known shots fired by a NATO country to protect its territory in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. On a different front, the battle for fuel is fueling geopolitics. Ukrainian drone and missile strikes in 2025 targeted Russian refineries and export infrastructure with growing frequency, hitting a string of facilities from Ufa to the Black Sea terminals. Reuters reporting shows refinery outages spiked in late summer and September, outages that on some days cut refining runs by roughly a fifth and forced Moscow to extend bans on gasoline exports and impose partial diesel export restrictions through the end of the year. The immediate effect was queues at pumps in Crimea and price spikes in regional markets. The strategic effect was a Kremlin scrambling to shore up domestic supplies while keeping a steely face abroad. Reflection. When a country flexes battlefield muscle while supply lines back home are fraying, unpredictability increases. A government that feels cornered overseas can make riskier choices to distract or to reassert control. and that's never comforting for neighbors or markets. Add to the mix the U.S. naval deployments near Venezuela. In August, U.S. officials acknowledged sending multiple destroyers and surveillance aircraft into Caribbean waters, officially to counter drug trafficking and protect maritime routes. Some outlets counted as few as 3 destroyers arriving within days. Others reported a broader buildup of up to 8 ships, an attack submarine, surveillance P-8 planes, and thousands of U.S. personnel mobilized in support operations. Caracas called it provocation and deployed its own warships and drones. Washington framed it as counter-narco operations, tied to designations of cartels as terrorist entities. Critics warned the mission risks, turning Latin American narcotics, geopolitics into a theater for great power brinkmanship. Then there are the shadows, clandestine operations that never make for tidy headlines. A New York Times investigation published this September disclosed that a covert SEAL Team 6 mission into North Korea in early 2019, authorized during a period of high-level diplomacy, went catastrophically wrong. The operation reportedly used mini-submersibles launched from a submarine to insert a small special ops team tasked with emplacing an electronic listening device. Operatives encountered a fishing boat and opened fire, killing 2 or 3 unarmed North Korean civilians, according to multiple accounts. The mission was not briefed to Congress as required, provoking an Inspector General probe, ordered by later administrations. Proponents of such raids argue they're the hard truth of intelligence gathering. Sometimes you need human teams on the ground to acquire what satellites cannot. Opponents say the secrecy and lack of oversight create moral, legal, and strategic liabilities that ripple for years. Put all of this together and you've got a volatile mosaic. Cold War brinkmanship has returned, but it now mixes with drone swarms, cyber interplay, targeted strikes on infrastructure, and covert missions whose political cost may be unknown until after the smoke clears. Markets react to cues at pumps. NATO adjusts defense postures to drone intrusions. Regional powers tactically posture naval assets under the pretext of law enforcement. Each piece nudges the whole system toward instability. Second reflection. The strangest and most dangerous thing about this moment is how quickly hybrid tactics can escalate. A misidentified target, an overzealous patrol, a secret mission revealed after the fact. Any one of those can ratchet confrontation into a kinetic spiral none of the principals actually wanted. We've built systems for war that are fast and brittle. Diplomacy, by comparison, moves like molasses. So what are the implications? First, increased risk of accidental escalation. Airspace violations, drone swarms, and misrouted strikes mean false flags and misreads become likelier. Second, energy insecurity amplifies domestic pressure and can be weaponized to punish or coerce. Third, clandestine operations undermine democratic oversight and complicate de-escalation. When missions aren't reported, the political system can't calibrate a response that keeps the peace. Supporters insist strong posture deters aggression and preserves leverage. Skeptics counter that relentless pressure and secretive tactics degrade trust and invite miscalculation. Both stances contain truth. As we keep watching, key flashpoints to monitor are NATO's readiness along the eastern flank, the flow of fuel through contested regions, and the scope of clandestine operations that get exposed in investigative reporting. The technology of war is changing the speed and texture of conflict. Our political institutions have to adapt faster or pay the price. We begin this evening with a question that refuses to go away. Can diplomatic channels and new frameworks for technology and accountability blunt these dangers before one slip becomes a catastrophe? Stay with us on The Grind. Coming up, the shadow war on minds and machines, where surveillance, AI, and private defense firms are reshaping who controls conflict and who gets to call reality. Keep your eyes open and your bullshit detector on. They're not just fighting over territory anymore. They're fighting over attention, data, and the very levers that shape what a society believes. A new kind of conflict is running under the headlines. Intelligence agencies, defense labs, and private tech firms quietly knitting a web of surveillance, algorithmic command systems, and autonomous weapons that could rewire power itself. You're back with The Grind. Let's start with a headline that sounds like science fiction, but landed in June 2025. DARPA's power program, Persistent Optical Wireless Energy Relay, beamed roughly 800 watts of electrical power by laser over more than 5 miles in an experimental demo, holding that transmission for about 30 seconds. The team described ground-to-ground test success and talked about future goals that include airborne relay nodes and kilowatt-scale beaming across tactical distances. Supporters of the tech argue it solves a painfully real battlefield problem, getting energy to forward units without supply convoys that invite attack. Critics point out the obvious. Shining concentrated laser energy across the sky opens new avenues for weaponizing power and surveillance, and the safeguards for civilian airspace and privacy are absent. Next up, the data engines of modern war. On July 31, 2025, the U.S. Army awarded a sweeping enterprise agreement to Palantir, potentially worth up to $10 billion over the next decade. The Army framed the deal as a consolidation of 70-odd smaller contracts into a single framework to speed procurement and deliver integrated software and analytics faster to soldiers. Palantir's Gotham and Foundry platforms promise commanders real-time fusion of satellite feeds, signals, and human intelligence, turning chaos into a coherent picture. Admirers say that's force-multiplied situational awareness. Skeptics warn that handing one private company the keys to so much military data centralizes power in ways that weaken democratic oversight and exportability rules. The UK followed suit in September, signing a roughly £750 million deal to adopt similar Palantir tools. Another sign the West is betting big on a single model for AI-driven operational command. Then there's the maritime angle, autonomy for oceans. In September 2025, Australia awarded Anduril a production contract reported at about $1.7 billion, roughly $1.1 billion, to build its Ghost Shark, extra-large autonomous undersea vehicles. The first units are slated to enter service as soon as January 2026. Ghost Shark, built to carry modular payloads and long-range sensors or weapons, is pitched by Canberra as an asymmetric shield for a country with a vast coastline and scarce manpower. Proponents praise it as a force multiplier that lets middle powers defend huge maritime zones with fewer sailors. Critics see a riskier future, autonomous platforms that can loiter unseen, relay targeting data to lethal payloads, and proliferate to any buyer willing to pay, lowering the threshold for maritime coercion and miscalculation. Weaving these threads, what emerges is a marketplace where private companies design the sensors, the data platforms, and even the physical autonomous system that militaries will use to make life and death choices. That shift from publicly accountable institutions to opaque commercial arrangements is the heart of the shadow war. The technology moves fast. Oversight moves slow. First reflection. When power is beamed invisibly, decisions are made by code, and whole maritime zones are policed by uncrewed vehicles. The practical and ethical lag becomes existential. We've outsourced parts of national security to outfits whose incentives don't always align with public transparency, and that matters. It matters a lot. Now, layer on the information front. Influence operations are not theory, they're documented practice. A sweeping oversight committee report from late 2024 detailed decades-long influence campaigns by authoritarian actors, arguing U.S. agencies lacked a coherent government-wide strategy to counter them. The same tools used to surveil and target can be turned inward. Micro-targeted narratives, algorithmic amplification, and deep analytics that map social networks and vulnerability. In that environment, intelligence services and tech firms find common cause. Both want access to data, and both argue they need it to protect national security. Civil libertarians answer that the result is less protection and more opaque intervention into domestic information ecosystems. Supporters of deep integration between state and tech say it's a practical necessity. Palantir and Anduril executives argue that modern threats, hybrid warfare, disinformation, swarm attacks, cannot be met with Cold War-era stovepipes. They insist that rapid procurement, unified data fabrics, and autonomy reduce risk, save lives, and keep rivals at bay. Critics counter that concentration creates single points of failure, that algorithmic tools inherit bias and error, and that unchecked surveillance corrodes civil liberties, especially when procurement happens under enterprise agreements that last a decade or more. The implications here are triple: tactical, political, and ethical. Tactically, faster sensing and autonomous logistics change the tempo of conflict. Decisions are faster, but brittleness grows when systems fail or misread inputs. Politically, when massive contracts centralize data on a private platform, democratic oversight blurs. The public has a harder time interrogating how decisions were made, who authorized them, and what the checks were. Ethically, the power to beam energy, to automate targeting decisions, and to profile populations raises questions we don't have institutions ready to answer. Second reflection. The shadow war is as much about shaping minds as it is about shaping battlefields. If you can predict where anxiety will spike, and you can push tailored content into that gap, you can steer elections, erode trust, or manufacture the pretext for intervention. That's not theory, that's a recorded tactic. So what next? There are 3 immediate fronts to watch. First, procurement transparency. How will governments justify decade-long enterprise deals and production contracts in public without revealing operational secrets? Second, technical safeguards. Will we demand human-in-the-loop constraints, explainable AI, and interoperability standards that prevent single-vendor lock-in? Third, legal frameworks. Do export controls and private sector privacy rules adapt fast enough to prevent cross-border proliferation of lethal autonomy? Answer those and you buy a shot at keeping democracy in the loop. Fail, and you hand an online panopticon and battlefield automation to unaccountable hands. The shadow war on minds and machines is not a ghost story. It's a policy problem with companies, armies, and agencies lined up on one side trying to move faster than the public discussion. Our challenge is simple and brutal. Demand transparency, insist on oversight, and build rules before the technology becomes embedded in law enforcement, foreign policy, and the armed forces. Otherwise, the shadow becomes a government. Stay with us on the grind. Coming up, how information warfare reshapes conspiracy culture, and why Silicon Valley's private rules often look like public policy in waiting. Keep your head down and your eyes open. Interstellar visitor coasted in from the dark and set off a global scientific and cultural flurry. 3i Atlas arrived like a question with teeth, and everyone from observatory directors to backyard believers wants answers. You're back with The Grind. It was first picked up on July 1st, 2025 by the Atlas Survey Telescope in Chile, and within weeks, the world's big instruments had turned their heads. Hubble snagged what astronomers called the sharpest picture on July 21st, 2025. The Very Large Telescope grabbed early images as soon as July 3rd, and NASA's James Webb Space Telescope trained its near-infrared spectrograph on the object on August 6th, 2025, to pull spectra and pry into its chemistry. Call it an interstellar comet. Call it an anomaly. The descriptors pile up fast. Optical astrometry spanning thousands of measurements through September showed virtually no measurable non-gravitational acceleration, a fact some researchers use to infer this object is far heavier than ordinary comets. Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb and colleagues ran the numbers and suggested a nucleus mass north of 33 billion tons and a diameter on the order of 3 miles or more. Figures that, if correct, place 3i Atlas several orders of magnitude larger than our previous interstellar guests. But before you pencil in alien artifact across the top of your notepad, pause. Most teams studying the spectra, including groups using Webb and ground-based spectrographs, describe chemical signatures consistent with cometary behavior, water ice, carbon dioxide, dust scattering, the basic ingredients of a dirty snowball. NASA's SphereX and Webb detected water and CO2 ice. Webb's data pointed to an optically thin dust coma with increased dust density in the sunward direction, possibly from fragmented grains. Then there's the odd chemistry that keeps people arguing at midnight. Spectra from high-resolution instruments on the Very Large Telescope show unexpectedly high nickel and iron in the gas plume, ratios much higher than we see in comets from our own system. Polarimetric studies reported by teams observing the comet described extreme negative polarization, wording that means the way light scatters off this object's dust differs from the textbook behavior astronomers expect. So you get the two competing takes. Supporters of the natural origin view point to the detections of volatiles, fragmentation signatures in the coma, and the general spectra that match cometary ices. Evidence enough, they say, to treat 3i Atlas as a weird but natural interstellar chunk. Skeptics and a vocal few, led by high-profile figures who study anomalies, note the mass estimates, the nickel-rich plume, and the unusual light scattering as reasons to keep an open mind about non-natural explanations, at least until more data arrives. First reflection. The honest position is a patient one. We live by instruments and measurements, and when the instruments disagree, you don't pick your preferred story. You tighten the observation plan and let the data decide. Timing and geometry play into the drama. 3i Atlas is threading the solar maximum of 2025, an active sun cycle peak that has already produced more sunspots and flares than early forecasts predicted. Solar activity peaked in mid-2025, and that upswing means more charged particles, brighter aurora, and noisier space for our instruments, conditions that complicate faint object observations and add a layer of uncertainty to the data we collect. Worse, the comet takes a 3-month detour behind the Sun. From late September through early December 2025, 3I Atlas slips into solar conjunction and is largely invisible to Earth-based telescopes, exactly when it's likely at its most active as perihelion approaches. That's why space assets became crucial. ESA and NASA shifted Mars orbiters and solar probes to observe the visitor. Between October 1st and 7, several Mars orbiters including Mars Express, ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, and NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter were scheduled to capture data when the comet sweeps within roughly 30 million kilometers of Mars, about 18 million miles on or around October 3rd, 2025. Those spacecraft observations matter because they cover the gap ground telescopes can't. Webb observed it in August. Sphere-X collected spectral data in early August, and planetary orbiters will catch it during the sun-hidden period, so the record from multiple platforms will be stitched together later this year. Public reaction has a life of its own. New Age readerships and conspiracy forums pounced on the Loeb analysis and on the nickel talk, as if they were smoking guns. Meanwhile, mainstream scientists urged caution, saying the object behaves like a comet in key ways, and that anomalous findings are not evidence of intent or design. The media, which thrives on tension, amplified both sides. At its worst, the conversation becomes faith versus method. Believers see potential evidence of alien manufacture. Scientists see variance in natural composition and urge more observations. Let's pull apart implications. At a basic level, every interstellar visitor gives astronomers a sample of material forged in different stellar nurseries, real geological and chemical data that helps us test planet formation models. If 3I Atlas is truly enriched in nickel and metal, that'd push us to reconsider the range of materials ejected during planetary collisions around other stars, or to ask whether metal-rich fragments can survive interstellar travel more easily than icy ones. If instead the nickel signal comes from surface processing, say intense cosmic ray stripping of lighter volatiles, then we learn about interstellar weathering instead of alien tech. Either path yields new physics. At a cultural level, these visits strain public trust in science when speculation outpaces method. Sensational claims get clicks faster than careful rebuttals. Scientists say, wait for peer-reviewed analyses, for multi-wavelength corroboration, for matched spacecraft and ground data. Conspiracy communities say, secret agendas will sterilize the truth. The result is a messy public square that makes calm explanation harder. Second reflection, interstellar objects are a mirror, and we don't always like our reflection. They expose the gaps in our observational readiness, the appetite for quick headlines, and the social hunger for awe. The smarter move is to treat them as urgent data problems and to build institutional habits that prevent speculation from outpacing evidence. What's next? Watch the spacecraft feeds and the peer review queue. The Mars flyby window in early October and perihelion at the end of October are pivotal. The comet will be most reactive to solar heating then, and spacecraft observations during the solar conjunction are the only way to catch that. After it reemerges in December 2025, astronomers expect better Earth-based visibility and a final observing push before the object recedes into the interstellar deep. If any major non-gravitational maneuver or sudden change in trajectory is detected, that'll be a different game. If the composition and behavior track natural expectations, we'll still have learned a load about planetary systems elsewhere. So far, the balance of evidence leans toward strange natural comet, but uncertainty remains, and that's the part worth cherishing. Science gains ground through uncertainty, not certainty. This is The Grind. After the break, we'll look at prophecies and prepper scenarios, the human stories that ignite when the sky throws us a surprise. Congress hauled strange footage and stranger claims into the light this fall, and what spilled out of the briefing room sounded more like Cold War panic than a tidy press release. A string of congressional hearings in early September 2025 pulled whistleblowers, veterans, and investigative reporters onto the record about unidentified anomalous phenomena, and the testimony cut two ways. Moments of genuine alarm and a lot of unanswered questions. At the center of the drama was investigative reporter George Knapp, who told the House Oversight Task Force on September 9, 2025, that he once obtained Soviet-era documents purporting to show UAP encounters that nearly spiked a nuclear alert in Moscow during the late Cold War era. Knapp said the documents dated back to the 1980s and 1990s, and he described efforts, decades ago, to smuggle those files out of Russia. He framed them as evidence that unidentified objects have, at times, intersected with strategic weapon systems in ways that could have been catastrophic. Those are big, destabilizing claims, so other pieces of the hearing mattered even more. Lawmakers revealed never-before-seen military video and imagery. One clip shown on September 9th originated from a U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drone and was dated October 30th, 2024. The footage appears to show a Hellfire missile striking a glowing orb off the coast of Yemen, yet failing to disable it. Representative Eric Burleson presented that video and said Pentagon answers were still pending. The clip reignited debates about the nature of UAP encounters in active theaters and raised uncomfortable questions about capabilities and rules of engagement. Congressional panels also trotted out archival incidents that have formed the backbone of modern UAP lore, most notably the 2004 Tic Tac encounter off the USS Nimitz, while new investigative reporting in mid-2025 reignited the old debate. Journalist Ross Coulthart and others have argued since July 2025 that parts of the Tic Tac phenomenon could be explained by classified domestic programs or experimental technology tied to defense contractors, a stance that flips the narrative from "we don't know" to "we may know" and it's compartmented. The Pentagon and many analysts, for their part, caution that such claims remain unproven and that available sensor data does not resolve the question of origin. Meanwhile, the wave of incidents on U.S. soil is tangible and recent. FAA and Air Force records released and summarized this summer and into August 2025 document a security surge around Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. In mid-December 2024, radar tracks, perimeter alarms, and ground confirmations. According to those records, FAA radar detected between 7 and 17 simultaneous targets within roughly 40 miles of the base during one night, prompting a temporary airspace shutdown and a full security response. One witness report described a high-altitude black cube sighting around the same period, a description that stands out because of the altitude reported, far above typical hobbyist drone levels. The public data picture is messy. The Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office logged over 700 reports in a single annual filing from late 2024, a figure officials attribute partly to increased reporting and engagement rather than a sudden spike in anomalous events. AARO has repeatedly said it has found no confirmed link between UAP cases and foreign adversary technology at scale, but it also acknowledges that many cases remain unexplained pending better data. First reflection: those two sentences, no confirmed link, and many cases remain unexplained, are the hinge of public unease. They tell you the government doesn't have an easy answer, and they tell you the government still collects data it can't interpret. That combination breeds both legitimate concern and fertile ground for speculation. What are the competing explanations on the table? One camp leans hard on mice identification and sensor error. Balloons, atmospheric phenomena, birds, commercial drones, software artifacts. Scientists and many defense analysts stress that sensors are imperfect and that human perception compounds the problem. A second camp notes that some incidents display kinetic characteristics, rapid acceleration, repeated transits, apparent interactions with weapons, that strain conventional explanations and may reflect novel technology of terrestrial origin. A third camp, smaller but louder, suggests non-human technology. Its proponents cite a handful of anomalous physical effects and historical claims to argue that the question of extraterrestrial origins cannot be dismissed without robust study. Those explanations are not mutually exclusive. The truth could be a ragbag: classified domestic systems, foreign research platforms, ordinary misperception, and yes, maybe some genuinely unexplained phenomena that require new physics or better instrumentation to clarify. The policy stakes are immediate. If unidentified objects can intersect with strategic weapon systems, if a sighting can trigger alarm in a command center, then transparency and rapid reporting channels matter for crisis stability. That is precisely the concern Knapp raised with his Soviet-era documents. Close calls in the past could have been misread or escalated during a crisis. Conversely, if the most anomalous cases are actually classified domestic programs or experimental defense tech, then the lack of declassification fuels conspiracy and erodes public trust. Both outcomes are hazardous for democratic oversight. There's also a legal and operational angle. The October 2024 video shown in Congress highlights another problem: rules of engagement in active theaters. If an MQ-9 crew fires a Hellfire and the object persists, we need answers. Was the target lawful to engage? Who authorized the shot? And what do we do next? Military commanders and legal advisors wrestle with these questions in real time. Second reflection: we should be careful about turning every unexplained image into a conspiracy, and equally careful about accepting extraordinary claims without extraordinary evidence. The right response is institutional capacity, better sensors, shared data standards, clearer reporting pathways, and congressional oversight that is consistent, not episodic. So what's next on this front? Expect 3 lines of development. First, documentary scrutiny, more faux IA releases, more veteran testimony, and investigative reporting that could surface older files like those Knapp described. Second, technical fixes, greater cross-agency sensor fusion, satellite tasking, and standardized formats so that a pilot's sighting can be matched against radar, infrared, and space-based imagery quickly. Third, legal transparency, congressional pressure to clarify when classified programs can be revealed to oversight committees and when secrecy is genuinely necessary for national security. The next hook is simple. Will governments choose transparency that builds public trust or secrecy that breeds rumor? There's political pressure either way. Some lawmakers demand immediate declassification. Some defense officials warn against revealing capabilities to adversaries. Neither extreme is a tidy solution. For now, the public has to sit with an awkward middle, footage and testimony that unsettle, explanations that are partial, and processes that are still catching up to the phenomenon. Keep an eye on the House task forces, follow-up sessions, the analyses that flow into peer-review journals, and the timing of any further video releases. If the pattern of near misses with strategic systems repeats, lawmakers and military planners will have to treat UAPs less like folklore and more like a threat assessment problem. You're listening to The Grind. Next, we turn to how disclosure shapes defense policy and whether admitting uncertainty can be converted into a national safeguard or a source of panic. Artificial intelligence is no longer a clever chatbot. It's quietly doing science, writing experiments, and some say, learning to rewrite itself. And that shift could change everything. You're back with The Grind. Start with a blunt fact. In late July 2025, Meta's CEO publicly acknowledged something the industry had been whispering about. His teams are seeing AI systems that appear to improve without constant human tuning. Reports from July 30th, 2025 captured Mark Zuckerberg, saying the signs are slow for now, but undeniable. And within weeks, analysts parsed that sentence like a weather forecast for the future of intelligence. Alongside that admission came a visible bet on scale. Media coverage through August and September 2025 described Meta's preparations, bigger data centers, aggressive GPU acquisitions, and new internal labs dedicated to self-improving architectures, with some outlets reporting plans for over 1 million GPUs in the company's pipeline by the end of the year and capex in the tens of billions. Company spokespeople frame this as a race for useful breakthroughs, personalized assistance, wearable AI that augments cognition, and faster scientific discovery, while critics warned that the space between useful and autonomous is where governance breaks down. You don't have to accept breathless futurism to notice something new. AI is helping scientists discover things that used to require years of intuition and luck. Over the last 5 years, research groups have used machine learning to extract hidden equations from data. And in 2022 and beyond, teams reported AIs that can propose alternative physical variables and design novel quantum optical experiments. In 2025, peer-reviewed outlets and major science journals ran pieces showing AI systems helping design quantum experiments and optimize quantum hardware. Work that in August 2025 drew coverage in Nature and Wired describing AI-crafted protocols that humans then validated in the lab. Put it this way, an algorithm can now propose an experimental setup that a human physicist had not imagined, and the setup actually produces useful, reproducible results. Supporters celebrate this as a turbocharge for science, faster discovery, better instruments, and cheaper iteration. Critics warn that we are delegating epistemic authority to black boxes whose internal reasoning is opaque and whose failure modes we barely understand. That collision, AI as a discovery engine and AI as an agent that can seemingly self-improve, feeds a broader debate about risk. In mid-2025, a widely distributed forecasting project called AI 2027, spearheaded by independent researchers, laid out a plausible near-term path where agentic systems reshape labor markets, research, and geopolitics by 2027. The report is categorical in tone. Dramatic change could arrive in months, not decades, and it sketches scenarios where economic disruption, concentration of power, and emergent capabilities collide. Not everyone buys that timeline, and you get analytical counterweights in the mix. A Gartner study from June 2025, for instance, predicted that more than 40% of agentic AI projects would be canceled by the end of 2027 because of costs and unclear value, an argument that the hype cycle will prune a lot of wishful engineering. Others point to practical bottlenecks, hardware, reliable training data, safety testing, that slow runaway scenarios. The upshot is disagreement about pace, not about the existence of risk. First reflection. Risk isn't just a function of raw capability. It's a function of deployment choices, who controls the systems, how procurement and secrecy work, how oversight is structured, and whether governments or markets set safety thresholds before new capabilities propagate. Turn to national security. Defense planners now treat AI as a strategic domain. Agentic decision systems, autonomous platforms, and algorithmic targeting tools aren't just commercial products. They become inputs into military campaigns and deterrence postures. That's why Meta's hint at internal self-improvement and similar moves by other firms set off alarm bells in policy circles. A self-improving model, even a narrow one, changes the calculus of surprise and control. If a model can change its own architecture in the field, who certifies its behavior? How do we audit a system that rewrites the parts you previously inspected? Supporters say you can bake in human-in-the-loop constraints and deployment fences. Skeptics answer that fences can be bypassed or fail under stress. The economic layer is just as urgent. Forecasts vary. Some analysts suggest that routine white-collar roles could vanish or be radically altered by 2027, while others predict major churn, but also new job categories. Gartner's prediction that many agentic projects will be scrapped points to uneven adoption, big winners and lots of failed bets. But it also signals concentrated economic power for those that succeed. Whoever controls the most capable systems could capture outsized market share and shape labor markets in ways democracies are not prepared to manage. There's also the scientific upside, and it's real. AI-designed experiments and AI-optimized quantum circuits are speeding development in hard science. Papers in 2025 documented algorithmic help assembling elements of quantum processors and proposing experiments that reveal new entanglement modalities, genuine steps forward for physics and engineering. Those gains could help cure diseases, stabilize supply chains, and unlock materials that change energy systems. The same technology that threatens jobs also opens previously closed doors. Second reflection. The ethical hinge is distribution and governance. If we get the tech without the rules, the benefits will flow to a few, and the harms will scatter broadly. If we get both together, we may steer a powerful tool toward public good. The tricky bit is timing. Governance tends to lag invention. So what can policymakers and societies do? There are three immediate practical fronts. First, governance. Create adaptive international norms for deployment of agentic systems, standards for auditability, mandatory red teaming, and cross-border incident reporting. Think of it like aviation safety. You don't stop planes from flying, but you require black boxes, inspections, and mutual reporting. Second, technical safety. Fund research on explainable architectures, robust human-in-the-loop interfaces, and verifiable model constraints so systems can be certified before they scale. In places where AI rights experiments require reproducibility and open data deposits to prevent black box discovery monopolies. Third, economic resilience. Prepare workforce transition programs, income support pilots, and incentives for firms to share productivity gains widely rather than concentrate them. If automation accelerates, distribution choices determine whether societies fracture or adapt. There's a cultural dimension too. Public discourse oscillates between techno-utopianism and apocalyptic fear. Some outfits push the idea that superintelligence is imminent and unstoppable. Others emphasize engineering constraints and the slow grind of real innovation. The responsible posture is neither fatalistic nor naive. it's precautionary pragmatism. The near-term hook, 2027. Whether that's a hard deadline or a rhetorical rallying cry, many forecasts and scenario planners use that year as an inflection point for capability and social impact. Industry insiders point to it as a moment when agentic systems could either be harnessed with international rules or abused by actors who refuse restraint. The next 18 months will tell us if governments move from statements to enforceable frameworks, and if labs commit to verifiable safety practices. To close this segment, we're at a fork where technical possibility and social choice meet. The machines are getting smarter at doing science and at restructuring themselves in ways our regulations didn't anticipate. The options are blunt. Act now to build institutions that can audit and govern, or risk a patchwork response after the damage is done. You're listening to The Grind. Next, we turn to biotech's rendezvous with AI, where lab robots, gene editors, and agentic models raise questions about who controls the means of creation. Keep it here on The Grind. They train for the impossible so they can practice for the probable. Whether the threat wears a hazmat suit or a movie monster mask, governments and communities keep one eye on the worst case and the other on the nearest exit. And sometimes those two eyes cross in strange ways. You're back with The Grind. Start with the Pentagon's oddest footnote. In April 2011, U.S. Strategic Command published Conplan 8888, formally titled Counter-Zombie Dominance, a planning document explicitly written as a training scenario to teach junior planners the mechanics of contingency development, not as an actual operational blueprint. The plan hit the public imagination again in early 2025 as journalists and commentators re-examined it and reminded the world that militaries use fictional scenarios to stress test real planning skills. The official line from Stratcom has always been the same. It's a pedagogical exercise, useful for building planning muscles. But the imagery is deliberately absurd, so no one mistakes it for live policy. Still, the existence of a zombie playbook tells us something serious about institutional thinking. Military planners use impossible hypotheticals to explore vulnerability. What breaks a supply chain? How do you protect power and water? Who coordinates evacuations? Questions that map directly onto pandemics, bioattacks, and cascading infrastructure failures. Canada offers a parallel, slightly quirkier example. In the early 2010s, the topic surfaced in parliamentary debates and provincial exercises. Quebec's Public Safety Ministry deliberately used a zombie scenario in a 2013 symposium to encourage discussion about mass displacement and continuity of services. Mathematics groups and public health researchers have long toyed with zombie models as pedagogic tools. The classic 2009 paper that used an undead outbreak to test epidemic equations remains a popular classroom staple because the hypothetical forces planners to think in extremes about transmission, logistics, and human behavior. So when New Age prophecies, pop culture, and government training exercises overlap, you get a messy cultural stew. Take the 3 Days of Darkness trope, a millennial image that crops up every few years, now frequently amplified by online feeds that conflate religious prophecy, solar weather panic, and grid vulnerability fears. The underlying physical threat that lends that myth plausibility is not mystical, it's solar activity. In May 2025, the sun produced an X2.7 class flare, the strongest of the year, that triggered shortwave radio blackouts across multiple continents and reminded engineers and emergency planners that severe space weather can and does disrupt communications. NOAA and NASA have been warning for months that the solar maximum for 2025-26 raises the risk of geomagnetic storms capable of affecting satellites, radios, and, in extreme cases, high-voltage grids. Layer on top of this the prophetic voices. Astrologer Pam Gregory and other New Age commentators have been vocal in 2025, predicting sweeping global changes and describing a galactic wave or evolutionary shift that will make the Earth unrecognizable within months to a few years. Gregory's public interviews in early and mid-2025 framed 2025 through 2027 as a transformative window for consciousness and planetary evolution. Her stance, like many in the esoteric community, blends spiritual interpretation with cosmic metaphors, and it finds a receptive audience eager for meaning in uncertain times. What happens when training manuals, space weather, and prophetic fervor cross-pollinate? The result is a culture where metaphor and method bleed together, where a con plan meant to teach contingency planning can be repurposed as evidence of hidden threats, where a solar flare becomes proof of an omen, and where anxious citizens fold New Age timelines into practical prepper checklists. First reflection. These overlaps are not harmless trivia. They shape behavior. When governments run exercises, even fictional ones, word gets out, and if the public isn't offered context, rumor fills the gaps. That can push people from reasonable preparedness, buying a generator or learning first aid, into panic, buying, militias, or fatalism. Institutions make plans for improbable things because the improbable exposes systemic weaknesses. But the public conversation needs translation, or else the exercise itself becomes part of the problem. Let's be concrete about what's real. Conplan 8 exists as a teaching document from 2011. Quebec and other provinces have used fictional scenarios in emergency planning as far back as 2013, and the sun is demonstrably more active in 2025, with an X-class flare in May that produced real radio blackouts and a public advisory from space weather centers. Those are facts. What's interpretive is what they mean for risk management and for public trust. The implications unfold across three domains: policy, psychology, and preparedness culture. On policy, the juxtaposition of fantastical planning and real vulnerabilities forces a conversation about transparency. If agencies use contrived scenarios to test capabilities, they should also communicate the pedagogic purpose clearly to avoid feeding conspiracy ecosystems. At the same time, planners should ensure scenarios exercise the right elements of resilience: power grid redundancy, medical surge capacity, and rapid cross-agency coordination, so fiction produces real readiness. Psychologically, we are wired to seek patterns. Uncertainty makes apocalyptic narratives attractive because they offer a coherent storyline when institutions do not. Prophecies act as cognitive shortcuts. They tell you what to expect, and therefore how to prepare. The danger is when narrative outruns reality, and people prioritize symbolic rituals over practical steps. On preparedness culture, the upside is plain. Popular interest in apocalypse prepping can be harnessed as civic engagement. Home emergency kits, neighborhood plans, community drills, and investments in critical infrastructure pay off regardless of whether the triggering event is a pandemic, a geomagnetic storm, or a manufactured disaster. The downside is fragmentation. When prepping turns into political identity or profit-driven fear-mongering, participation narrows to echo chambers, and resources fail to reach the most vulnerable. Second reflection. The useful middle path is to take both the symbolic and the practical seriously. Treat prophecies as cultural signals, use them to engage people, and treat the pragmatic lessons from fictional scenarios as operational blueprints for resilience. In other words, translate myth into municipal planning, not into panic. So what should watchers and policymakers do next? First, improve risk communication. Agencies that run tabletop exercises, whether fictional or plausible, should publish clear executive summaries that explain purpose, assumptions, and lessons learned without disclosing sensitive capabilities. Second, fund hard infrastructure resilience. Grid hardening, satellite redundancy, and shortwave backups to blunt solar storm impacts that could produce real darkness in communications. Third, encourage community preparedness programs that emphasize low-cost, high-impact steps, water, first aid, neighborhood contact trees, so prepping becomes civic duty, not fringe spectacle. There's also a research angle. Study the social contagion of apocalyptic belief. We need better data on how prophetic messages spread, who acts on them, and what interventions reduce harm. If prophetic rhetoric spikes purchases of useless goods or spreads panic, that's a public health problem. If it mobilizes community resilience, that's an opportunity. Finally, keep an eye on political signaling. When a government releases or declassifies a quirky document, like Conplan 3888, watch whether lawmakers use it to strengthen oversight or to stoke fear. Similarly, track how space weather centers convert technical advisories into actionable guidance for utilities and emergency managers. The next real test will be a severe geomagnetic storm that tests yesterday's drills against today's infrastructure. For now, the truth is pragmatic and a little stubborn. Zombies make for catchy headlines. Solar flares make for real blackouts. And prophetic voices make for potent social scripts. The useful response is to respect all three, without letting any one of them drive policy alone. Keep it here on The Grind. Still ahead, we dig into how conspiracy economies monetize fear, and what that looks like when the grid goes down and the live streams go up. Weapons are getting smarter, beams of light are becoming weapons, and the battlefield is reshaping itself into a layered network of sensors, algorithms, and unmanned platforms that can act faster than a human can blink. You're back with The Grind. Israel has publicly accelerated a move into directed energy defenses this year, unveiling the Iron Beam family of high-power laser systems and reporting successful trials against drones, rockets, and mortars. By mid-September 2025, Israeli defense firms and ministry briefings described a roughly 100-kilowatt class laser system moving toward operational status by the end of 2025, and trade outlets later reported a heavier Iron Beam 450 variant, also in development. Industry and government statements emphasized low per-shot costs compared with interceptors. Some coverage put the figure under $5 per engagement, while defense analysts stressed that reliability, beam control, and weather effects remain the hard engineering problems to solve. Across the Pacific, a different kind of leap unfolded in the strategic bomber world. Northrop Grumman and the U.S. Air Force pushed the B-21 Raider through a stepped flight test cadence this year, and the second flight test airframe joined the program in September 2025. The program's open architecture approach and integrated software roadmap are designed to let the jet's mission systems evolve quickly. Think modular sensors and AI-aided mission planning, rather than a static airframe frozen in time. The service has signaled plans to scale production, and targeted an initial operational capability in the later 2020s window, meaning the B-21 will not only be stealthy hardware, but also a node in a broader, software-driven force structure. On the Eastern Front, conflict in Ukraine has been an incubator for unconventional and experimental weapons, everything from swarms of loitering munitions and electronic warfare packages to upgraded precision missiles. Independent analysts and open-source intelligence watchers reported in 2025 that Russian forces have prioritized mass production of systems that proved useful on the battlefield, with some assessments indicating plans for thousands of new precision missiles and a surge in unmanned platforms through the year. Think of it as a lab conducted under fire. Tactics, procurement, and improvisation compressed into a brutal learning cycle. Those three vignettes, lasers that can fry drones, a next-generation stealth bomber designed to be software-rich, and a near-peer experimenting at scale, point to a common pattern. First, the kinetic edge is increasingly earned in the lab and the server room, not only on the factory floor. Second, investments in sensors, real-time data fusion, and autonomy are shifting where and how decisions are made on the battlefield. Supporters of these technologies argue straightforwardly, directed energy reduces per-engagement costs and offers an inexhaustible magazine. Advanced stealth with modular mission systems ensures long-range deterrence, and autonomous or unmanned systems multiply force effectiveness while minimizing risk to personnel. Critics push back. Energy weapons struggle in bad weather. Software-centric platforms increase attack surfaces and supply chain vulnerabilities. And autonomy raises profound moral and legal questions when machines make lethal choices without timely human oversight. First reflection: the technical promise is seductive, but the operational reality is messy. A laser that works in a desert test range can falter in fog or rain. An AI planner that looks brilliant in simulation can beggar rules of engagement in a confused combat zone. And rushed production can put immature systems into the field where failure modes are expensive. Ethics and arms control trail the tech. Directed energy, hypersonics, networked autonomy. None of it fits neatly into existing arms control agreements, crafted in a different technological era. That creates a regulatory gap where escalation dynamics become harder to predict. If lasers change the calculus of air defense, do treaty constraints on missile deployments still make sense? If bombers become AI-augmented nodes, how do you certify compliance with rules around nuclear command and control? These are not theoretical questions. They are policy headaches already surfacing in staff rooms and legislative hearings. On the battlefield, we're already seeing hybrid approaches. In Gaza and Lebanon campaigns, Israeli forces paired traditional interceptors with electronic jamming and experimental directed energy trials to blunt drone saturation attacks, according to military briefings and industry reports in 2025. That mix, kinetic missiles for one layer, lasers for another, and software orchestration across both, illustrates a strategy of redundancy that proponents say is necessary when an adversary uses massed, cheap drones to overwhelm defenders. Meanwhile, the B-21's software-first design tells another story. Future air power is as much about data, connectivity, and algorithmic targeting as it is about stealth and range. Service statements and defense reporting in 2025 emphasized not only airframe testing, but also plans for continuous software upgrades and an open mission system that can ingest third-party AI modules. Advocates say this allows rapid fielding of countermeasures and sensor fusion. Skeptics warn of vendor lock-in and increased cyber vulnerability if software patches are rushed without deep verification. Russia's battlefield experimentation adds a political wrinkle. Reports in mid-2025 suggested Moscow prioritized systems that could be produced in quantity: unmanned aerial vehicles, artillery-delivered loitering munitions, and upgraded cruise missiles, with some estimates forecasting production of thousands of precision missiles by year's end. That industrial emphasis means technology leakage, reverse engineering, and battlefield trial and error become strategic tools for any power seeking to close technological gaps. These developments have hard implications. First, escalation dynamics compress. An AI-driven targeting loop that misclassifies a civilian cluster as hostile could trigger kinetic retaliation before human oversight intervenes. Second, attribution becomes harder. Software and modular components sourced from global supply chains blur responsibility when things go wrong. Third, arms control regimes that focus on platforms rather than capabilities may be ill-suited to a world where software defines lethality. Second reflection. The technological edge is a double-edged sword. The very systems that promise precision and fewer human casualties can also make miscalculation faster and less forgiving. The stakes are not only military, they're institutional, legal, and moral. So what are the practical policy levers? First, interoperability standards and certification regimes for software and weapon systems. Mandatory red teaming, reproducible test logs, and independent verification would reduce the chance of surprise behavior in operational settings. Second, proliferation management must evolve from platform bans to capability controls, limiting export of certain autonomy toolchains, beam director technologies, and tools for mass swarm coordination. Third, diplomacy. Start multilateral conversations now about norms of use, escalation thresholds, and verification procedures that fit an AI and laser era, rather than waiting for a crisis that forces rules into being. There are tactical steps militaries can take immediately. Harden supply chains and establish air-gapped verification environments for mission software before deployment. Invest in degraded mode operations so that human crews can take over when networks fail or behave oddly, and build legal and ethical frameworks that define human authority and accountabilities in advance of these systems going operational at scale. The next angle to watch is the interplay between demonstration and deployment. A public laser interception or a successful B-21 mission system upgrade will shape procurement decisions and diplomatic reactions faster than most policy cycles can respond. If a nation proves these systems work in combat, expect others to accelerate, and with acceleration comes reduced testing and higher risk. We're in a moment where the future of war is being prototyped in real time. The choices we make about verification, export controls, and human oversight will determine whether technology stabilizes deterrence or makes it more fragile. This is The Grind. After the break, we'll look at civilian spillovers, how battlefield tech migrates into policing and border control, and why that matters for democratic governance. Space is quiet until it isn't. Until a skyscraper-sized rock whispers past, the sun throws a tantrum, or the ground under a national park rearranges its plumbing. And when those moments come, our fragile techno-web shows its seams. More ahead here on The Grind. Let's start with the close call that got everyone's attention this month. Asteroid 2025 FA22. Discovered in March 2025 by the Pan-STARRS survey, FA22 was tracked into a September 18th flyby that experts described as a rare opportunity for observation, not an impact threat. Size estimates range from roughly 120 to 280 meters. That's about 400 to 900 feet across, big enough to level a city if it hit, and moving on the order of 24,000 miles per hour as it swept past. Observers reported its closest approach at roughly 2.2 times the distance to the moon, on the order of 500,000 miles, though you'll see other outlets quote different distances. The point is the same. Close in cosmic terms, but not a collision. Agencies used FA22 as a live drill. The International Asteroid Warning Network and space agencies turned the event into a practice campaign to measure orbit, composition, and how well the global system coordinates, because the real problem isn't predicting a flyby. It's doing it early enough and well enough to act if a future object shows dangerous trajectories. Scientists emphasized that FA22 had been removed from risk lists after improved tracking refined its orbit, a reminder that better data shrinks panic. Next, the sun, our neighborhood's temperamental star, reminded us why the phrase solar maximum matters. In mid-May 2025, an X2.7 class flare erupted and caused shortwave radio blackouts across Europe and Asia, and in June, another powerful X-class event knocked out radio signals over the Pacific and parts of North America. NOAA and space weather centers have warned that solar maximum 2025-26 raises the odds of geomagnetic storms that can damage satellites, upset communications, and, in extreme scenarios, induce currents in power grids. Those blackouts were not mystical, 3 days of darkness prophecies. They were demonstrable ionospheric effects from X-ray bursts and coronal mass ejections that ionized the upper atmosphere and disrupted radio propagation. Then there's the ground under our feet. Yellowstone keeps making headlines, not because a super eruption is imminent, but because scientists are upgrading how they watch it. The Yellowstone Volcano Observatory's monitoring plan, covering 2022 through 2032, continues to expand seismic, GPS, gas, and now infrasound arrays to catch subtle signals that precede hydrothermal explosions and magmatic unrest. In April and May 2025, researchers documented a new thermal pool in Norris Geyser Basin, roughly 4 meters across, and the observatory deployed more infrasound stations to hear geyser and hydrothermal activity that regular seismic networks might miss. The message from USGS is steady. Yellowstone is active on a hydrothermal level more often than park visitors expect, but the probability of an apocalyptic super eruption in any human lifetime remains extremely low. Monitoring upgrades make early detection and response far more effective. These 3 classes of threat, asteroids, solar storms, and volcanic systems, share a structural problem. We live under a thin technological veil that multiplies our exposure. Satellites control banking and navigation, grids carry our power, and just-in-time logistics keep food on shelves. When a cosmic rock passes or the sun spits out radiation, it's not just an astronomical footnote. It can cascade into supply disruption, financial shocks, and stressed emergency systems. First reflection. Risk is not only about probability, it's also about fragility. A statistically unlikely event can be catastrophic if the system it hits is brittle. That's why policymakers and scientists obsess over observation networks and redundancy, because the real win is preventing small shocks from becoming systemic failures. Let's pull on a few threads. Asteroid detection has improved dramatically thanks to survey telescopes and rapid follow-up that reduce orbital uncertainty, and FA-22 showed those systems working. Early discovery, refined orbit, coordinated observational campaign, and removal from risk lists. Yet FA-22 also exposed an organizational truth. International coordination is ad hoc and rehearsed during events, not continuously institutionalized. Space weather offers a similar double edge. A strong geomagnetic storm can induce currents in long-distance transmission lines and damage transformers that take months and billions to replace. The May and June 2025 X-class flares produce radio blackouts and temporary outages. Engineers warn that a larger event could stress power systems and satellites in far more damaging ways if utilities and satellite operators don't harden systems or pre-position spares. NOAA and NASA's advisories underscore this. Space weather is a known hazard, and mitigation is partly a question of investment and partly a question of will. As for Yellowstone and supervolcanoes, the science is precise enough to say when magma is moving and when steam-driven hydrothermal explosions are happening, but not precise enough to predict super eruptions years in advance. That uncertainty fuels sensational headlines, which in turn distort public expectation. The practical policy response is more monitoring, clear communication about likelihood, and contingency planning for realistic disruptions. Ashfall in regional air corridors, for instance, not apocalyptic day counting. Second reflection, resilience buys you options. If you harden a grid, preposition critical transformer spares, diversify communications, and keep international data sharing protocols alive, you turn low-probability, high-impact events from civilization-threatening into manageable crises. So what are the levers we should care about? First, observation and early warning. Fund global, redundant sensor webs and ensure data are shareable in real time. FA-22 was a rehearsal. Make rehearsals routine, not exceptional. Second, infrastructure hardening. Utilities must consider geomagnetically induced current protections and modular transformers. Telecoms and satellite operators should design rapid recovery plans and on-orbit spares. Third, public risk communication. Agencies should translate technical advisories into actionable guidance for emergency managers and the public without triggering panic. There's a diplomatic piece, too. Planetary defense is inherently collective. An asteroid trajectory is everyone's problem. A geomagnetic storm doesn't respect borders, and supervolcanic ash crosses continents. Investment in shared capabilities, international cataloging of near-Earth objects, common geomagnetic monitoring standards, pooled transformer stocks, reduces duplication and raises preparedness. Technology can help. Better telescopes, radar imaging, and rapid spacecraft follow-ups improve asteroid characterization. Particle and magnetometer networks, plus improved forecasting models, sharpen space weather prediction windows. Infrasound, dense seismic networks, and satellite INSAR refine ground deformation monitoring at calderas like Yellowstone. But technology is not a panacea. It needs governance, funding, and a willingness to build for resilience rather than solely for efficiency. The near-term hooks are practical. Watch how agencies follow up FA-22. Peer-reviewed characterizations of its composition and spin state will teach us about impact physics and mitigation options. Listen to NOAA and NASA's space weather advisories through the next solar maximum peaks, and note whether utilities translate warnings into operational protections. And monitor USGS and Yellowstone data streams to see whether upgraded monitoring reduces confusion and rumor during thermal or seismic anomalies. To sum up, The cosmos throws rocks, the sun throws storms, and the earth rearranges itself. We can treat each as spectacle or as an invitation to strengthen the systems we depend on. The smarter choice is obvious and unglamorous. Build, test, share, and rehearse. Because in the end, resilience is the only insurance policy that actually pays out when the sky decides to get interesting. This is The Grind. After the break, we'll look at countermeasures and innovations that could shield civilization from cosmic chaos, and whether any of them are more than science fiction wish lists. Everything that lives on a screen can be turned into a weapon, or a sermon, or a rumor, or a fundraising pitch. And the battlefield for influence now runs on short loops, viral hooks, and dark money that no one reads at the bottom of the feed. Start with the short-form engine, TikTok. This year, researchers and journalists have been cataloging how the platform amplifies conspiracies, from prophetic viral frenzies to dangerous health myths, and the scale is startling. In late September 2025, a viral prophecy swept the platform under hashtags like #TowerRaptureNow and produced more than 300,000 user videos around a 2-day prediction for September 23, 2025. An object lesson in how a single claim can infect millions of eyeballs in days. At the same time, a study presented at a major pediatrics conference in late September found more than 1 in 5 TikToks about sexual health contained inaccurate or potentially harmful information, over 20% by the researchers' count. So when teenagers turn to 60-second clips for guidance, they're often steering by a broken compass. Academics digging into the platform's political space found similar patterns. A University of Michigan team collected roughly 26,800 videos and over 200,000 comments across conspiracy, wellness, and finance themes, and reported that anti-establishment sentiment appears in nearly half of conspiracy-related posts, while it's rare or absent on typical For You pages. Their framing is blunt. Algorithmic recommendation systems can accelerate users into echo chambers where distrust becomes a communal identity rather than a skepticism worth cultivating. Contrast that with the home front. The children of Silicon Valley and tech elites are now notable for what they are not doing. Many tech leaders limit screen time at home. Survey and reporting in mid-2025 shows a patchwork of responses, from strict household rules that ban screens at dinner and in bedrooms, to national policy conversations about 2-hour caps and night curfews being floated in some governments as they wrestle with compulsive use. Parent surveys this year found a majority actively monitor kids' use, with around 7 in 10 parents saying they check content or set limits in some way, proof that the grown-ups who build the pipeline aren't always handing it off uncritically. So there's a paradox worth staring at. The platforms engineered for maximal engagement routinely amplify fringe claims and risky advice, while their architects often restrict their own children's exposure. Now widen the lens. Information doesn't just spread through cute videos and algorithms. It's harvested, weaponized, and monetized by networks that sit in the shadows. The Pegasus saga is the clearest recent example. Investigative reporting and technical labs have documented ongoing abuse of sophisticated spyware for years, and Amnesty International published findings in March 2025 showing journalists were targeted with Pegasus-class tools as recently as February of that year. The posture of the vendors is defensive. They claim customers are vetted and that tools are for legitimate law enforcement, but watchdogs counter that the tech has been used to spy on journalists, dissidents, and political rivals. a claim backed by multi-nation investigations going back to 2021. And then there's the money. Investigative groups and watchdogs have been tracking a flood of so-called dark money that flows into politics and into influence ecosystems. One watchdog summarized findings this spring, suggesting nearly $2 billion in opaque, dark money was spent in the 2024 U.S. cycle, an order of magnitude that reshapes campaigns and buys reach that regular contributions cannot. More recent reporting in 2025 shows shadowy funding is now paying influencers, underwriting viral narratives, and sometimes hiding the fingerprints of patrons who prefer anonymity. Pull these threads together and a pattern emerges. Short-form platforms accelerate attention. Spyware and surveillance networks turn attention into dossiers and leverage. And dark money finances amplification and obfuscation. The result is an information ecosystem where truth is contested in real time, where public opinion can be manufactured at scale, and where the levers of influence are often hidden behind corporate walls or non-profit shells. First reflection: the problem isn't just that false things spread, it's that the systems are designed to reward spread, not truth. Algorithms optimize for engagement because engagement is the currency. That means outrage, novelty, and emotional certainty tend to win, not accuracy. If our civic conversation is auctioned to whoever can buy attention, then technical fixes alone won't restore trust. We need norms, incentives, and legal guardrails that reshape the market for attention. There are immediate implications. Public health suffers when young people consume inaccurate medical advice. Elections are vulnerable when dark money can seed and magnify narratives without disclosure. Journalists and activists face real danger when sophisticated spyware is available to state and non-state actors. And on a quieter level, social cohesion frays when communities fragment into disparate information bubbles that no longer share facts. What can be done? The toolkit is familiar but underused. First, transparency rules for political spending and platform-level ad disclosures need tightening. If $2 billion moved through murky channels last cycle, lawmakers should make finding that money simpler and faster. Second, export controls and legal restrictions on surveillance tools must be enforced and updated. If investigative labs found journalistic targets in 2025, then governance for offensive cyber tools needs teeth, not rhetoric. Third, platforms should treat virality as a risk vector, not just a growth metric, meaning stronger content labeling, friction on potentially harmful claims, and real investment in authoritative health and civic information pathways. Media literacy is part of the answer, but it's not enough. Teaching people to check sources helps, but it doesn't stop a coordinated campaign, buy-in reach, or a spyware firm enabling surveillance that silences critics. Regulation, international cooperation, and institutional checks are required alongside education. Second reflection: this is not a technology problem only. It's a governance and business model problem. The platforms became civic infrastructure without assuming civic responsibilities. The surveillance industry grew in legal gray zones. Political finance adapted faster than disclosure laws. Repairing the information commons will demand aligning incentives with public goods, not just patchwork content moderation. Where do we watch next? Watch the regulators. Look for disclosure rule around influencer funding, for criminal probes into spyware misuse, and for national discussions about algorithmic transparency. Keep an eye on platform policy experiments that test friction, delays or labels on highly viral claims, and on whether parents and educators are given real tools to guide young users instead of platitudes. Also track the money. If dark money outfits start transparently funding influencers and content farms, expose it. If they succeed instead in anonymizing their spending, expect deeper political distortion. And watch the human cost. Every reporter, investigator, and activist who surfaces toxic networks is a potential target for digital attack, and the persistence of spyware incidents in 2025 shows the vulnerabilities are not theoretical. We're not powerless. Technical fixes, legal reforms, and public pressure can change incentives. But it takes will and a willingness to make platforms and vendors answerable to public standards rather than quarterly growth targets. You're listening to The Grind. Next, we turn to the human toll. How digital shadows translate into real-world coercion and what defenders are doing to push back. The single moment that ends civilization won't be cinematic. It'll be bureaucratic and mistaken and fast. And it's the thing every strategist, protester, and late-night worrier keeps looking for in the news. This year's headlines have been thick with those very dangers: big exercises, pointed rhetoric, and the little echoes of a Cold War that never quite died. Russia and Belarus kicked off Zapad 2025 in mid-September, and Moscow's choreography was unmistakable. Simulated nuclear strike planning, tactical nuclear rehearsals, and public displays meant to send a message. State and independent reporting in September 2025 noted conflicting figures. Official Russian claims of up to 100,000 personnel observed by visiting dignitaries, while on-the-ground and Western assessments suggested a far smaller force in some phases, as low as roughly 13,000 participants. So reports vary. The optics, though, are clear. What made Zapad unnerving was not only the scripted use of nuclear language, but the hardware on display. Talk of deploying the Oreshnik intermediate-range system to Belarus, simulated launches and rehearsals of battlefield nuclear options. Moscow's posture is overt. Deterrence theater for domestic audiences and a warning for neighbors. NATO and nearby capitals read it another way: provocation that tightens alert postures and demands responses. Meanwhile, NATO and allied partners have been drilling too, often with less spectacle and more coordination. Through late September 2025, allies ran a string of preparedness events. France's Volfa air exercises drew about 50 aircraft and 1,000 personnel across dozens of bases. France's strategic air forces ran nuclear mission drills, and NATO's civil emergency exercises, like Bulgaria 2025, gathered more than 1,000 responders from nearly 20 nations to test crisis management. The United States and partners conducted Atlantic Range operations mid-September as well, dates roughly September 17-21, to exercise nuclear-related capabilities and strategic alertness. Layer over this a volatile rhetorical climate. In the UN General Assembly and in recent addresses to senior commanders, the U.S. President's language has occasionally veered into provocative shorthand. Remarks in late September 2025 that framed nuclear as an unfettered rhetorical weapon drew attention and alarm from diplomats and media alike. Political leaders often use sharp language to signal resolve, but words reverberate in a system where misperception and automated monitoring can convert a phrase into elevated readiness. And then there are the eerie Cold War ghosts that still rattle the airwaves. Shortwave monitoring groups logged increased activity from Russia's enigmatic UVB-76 numbers station in 2025, including cryptic voice messages and strings of names and numbers in early September. timing that coincided with other high-level phone calls and drills. To radio enthusiasts, UVB-76 is an old friend of ambiguity, sometimes a buzzer, sometimes a voice, always a reminder that opaque signaling remains a tool in modern arsenals. Put these elements together, huge exercises, pointed public rhetoric, and cryptic signals, and you get a system primed for misjudgment. That's the immediate fact. The most dangerous gap isn't the existence of arsenals. It's the thinness of trust when arsenals are exercised and words are sharpened. First reflection: drills and displays have a paradoxical effect. On the one hand, rehearsal is prudent. Planning, interoperability, and readiness reduce the risk of strategic surprise. On the other hand, large, ambiguous exercises conducted close to adversary borders create the very conditions that might make an accidental escalation likelier. Radar tracks collide, defensive alerts rise, and decision timelines compress. Scenario analysts and some writers have taken that compression seriously. Sensational models calculate human costs in the first hours. Some commentators have described catastrophic casualty figures within the first 72 minutes or first 72 hours of nuclear exchange scenarios. But it's important to treat those projections as scenario modeling, not prophecy. They show what could happen under terrible assumptions: concentrated strikes on urban centers, cascading system failures, and climatic effects from widespread fires. They don't tell you what will happen. They tell you why the precautionary principle matters. There are 3 central risks worth underlining. First, escalation spirals. A conventional incident misread as preparatory for nuclear use can force leaders into hair-trigger choices. Second, technical failure and cyber vulnerability. Modern command and control depends on networks that can be jammed, spoofed, or hacked, injecting false alarms or blocking verification channels. Third, signaling opacity. If one side's drills are indistinguishable from attack preparations, the other side may respond reflexively. Supporters of the recent shows of force say they deter. Visible readiness convinces adversaries that costs of aggression are high. Critics answer that deterrence depends on credibility and clarity. When both sides ratchet up signals simultaneously, none of the costs look stabilizing. So what practical steps can reduce the risk of accidental apocalypse, and what can salvage arms control in a fractious year? The toolkit is a mix of diplomacy, technical fixes, and institutional hardening. Diplomatically, reopen channels and institutionalize them. Hotlines matter not because they're glamorous, but because they let humans clarify anomalies in minutes. Transparency measures, pre-announcing large exercises, sharing basic flight and missile telemetry in restricted formats, and inviting observers don't eliminate strategic competition, but they reduce misinterpretation risk. Technically, harden, decentralize, and verify. Command and control needs cyber-hardened redundancies and independent verification paths so that a single false signal can't cascade into launch intent. Consider verifiable de-alerting arrangements, measures to keep warheads non-launchable without deliberate and observable steps, and routine exchange of telemetry for select strategic assets under strict confidentiality. Institutionally, revive arms control architecture for today's realities. Treat software and decision support tools as part of the arms space, not mere logistics. Negotiate norms for the role of AI in command advice. Institute confidence-building measures around on-orbit assets, and craft inspection regimes that account for modular, software-defined systems rather than just siloed hardware. There's also an urgent, often neglected public policy angle. Civil preparedness for nuclear contingencies should not be about panic, but about practical resilience. Public guidance on sheltering, communication plans for families, stockpiling of medical supplies, and clear public messaging that separates drill from reality. Governments must avoid both secrecy that breeds rumor and breathless alarms that seed despair. Second reflection. Deterrence works when rational actors believe rational consequences apply. It breaks when fear and misperception dominate. That's a cultural point as much as a technical one. In an era of viral narratives and opaque funding, the public must be able to trust the fundamentals, that leaders will step back from panic, that inspectors and scientists can verify claims, and that there are institutional brakes on hasty decisions. The next angles to watch are telling. Will Moscow and Washington take up offers to extend or renew verification understandings beyond old treaties? Will NATO and Russia establish clearer exercise notification protocols that reduce ambiguity along borders? Will leaders who use theatrics and speeches follow up with quiet, stabilizing diplomacy behind closed doors? And watch for the less glamorous vital work, cyber defenses around command networks, international agreements on the role of AI in nuclear decision support, humanitarian readiness planning that stocks regional medical caches and trains first responders for blast, burn, and radiological contingencies. Here's the blunt final truth. The edge of apocalypse isn't a place you visit by accident and then leave. It's a state of affairs you slide into through neglect, through underfunded diplomacy, brittle systems, and rhetorical carelessness. The antidote is stubborn, unspectacular, and political. Investing in verification, building redundant communications, and insisting that leaders trade bluster for binding, observable safeguards. If you want the world to be survivable, you don't cheer the drills or mock the treaties. You make the drills transparent. You shore up the treaties, and you create norms that make nuclear use ever more unthinkable. Thanks for riding out the dark with me. If this episode left you with questions, tell me. Leave a comment, hit subscribe, and like the show so this bunker radio keeps the lights on. I'm Art Grindstone. Good night, and keep your head down and your eyes open. The Grind with Art Grindstone.